On February 24, 1966, Prime Minister Milton Obote scurried into a meeting of his cabinet with armed men, ordered for the arrest of 5 ministers and effectively suspended the independence constitution that he had sworn to protect and serve. The rest, as they say, is history. The country was thrust in political quicksand, starting with the attack on the former president and Kabaka of Buganda, Edward Mutesa Wani's palace, on May 24th. But more importantly, the start of an executive with overbearing powers over the other 2 arms of government. The doctrine of separation of powers is a fundamental pattern for the constitutional governance of any democracy. It is the idea of dividing the judiciary, legislature and the executive as independent but interdependent bodies that make up a government. The belief dates back to ancient Greece and Roman Empire days, but was fashioned by the French political philosopher Montesquieu in his 1748 work on political theory, The Spirit of Laws. According to the Justice Benjamin Odoki Constitutional Commission report, the doctrine was originally developed as a means of preventing tyranny, as concentrating power in one individual or organ of the state tends to be corrupting and resulting in dictatorship. The framers of the 1995 Constitution were well aware of the perils of an all-powerful president, from the experience under Obote I and Amin, who paid no regard to constitutional order. It is such that the Constituency Assembly, which drafted the 1995 Constitution after consulting with Ugandans, sought to cure it by adopting strong checks and balances and distributing powers of governance across the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. 30 years later, the separation of powers has tended to work, not in terms of pure doctrine, nor yet in terms of what assures the liberties of the people. Former Principal Judge James Ogola says there is no straight answer.
If it has not worked well, we would have asked which one of these 3 organs is responsible for the non-performance, non-observance of that doctrine of separation of powers. If we can identify the organ which has done it, again there's recourse. If it's the executive, if it's the legislative, they are both answerable in the 3rd organ, the judiciary. If it's the judiciary that's answerable, that's responsible for non-observance of that, and I hope that cannot be, but if it is, then they gain recourse.
He said, "We have not been able to live to the entire ideals of the Constitution."
I believe it's somewhere in between. Many of those ideals have been reached. We've been able to touch some of them. Some came earlier in the era and sort of became a little problematic along the way. Some have lived up to now, the full 30 years. Others have not seen even the light of day.
Speaking at the Grand Gala at International Conference Center, now Serena Hotel, on October 8, 1995, to usher in the new constitutional order, President Museveni accused President Obote of disenfranchising the people of Uganda and over-centralized power from the districts to the center. At the time, Mr. Museveni had only been in power for 9 years, albeit without elections. The new constitution allowed his government to stay on for another 9 months, during which elections were held. 3 decades down the road, critics argue that his long stay in power has created an all-powerful president, resulting in an executive chokehold on the judiciary and legislature.
Actually, the 67 Constitution and the 1995 Constitution, this one is bigger, it has more contemporary language, but it's basically a continuation. One can draw a straight line from 66, 67 to 1995 Constitution. 7 is Obote. In the way they see Uganda, it's a Uganda in which you can't talk about traditional institutions, in which traditional institutions are tolerated at best. Any discussion about subnational identity is in that word tribalism.
The concept of separation of powers, as envisaged in the 1995 Constitution, has consequently been undermined. Constitutional law don Kabumba Businje says The president is the only constant in the constitution that was once called progressive.
The design of a powerful president was based on two critical safeguards: term limits and an age limit. So the strong presidency was founded on the assumption that the president would change at least after 10 years, and also conceivably not after 75 years. So once the 2005 amendment happened, for all intents and purposes, the constitution collapsed.
The doctrine of separation of powers, according to experiences elsewhere, is imperative for democracy and good governance, ensuring no arm of government is superior or dominant over the other, or would have unchecked power. In Kenya, for instance, the judiciary and the legislature have the backbone to defy the executive. In Malawi, Botswana, Senegal, incumbents have even lost the elections. This promise has been lost on Ugandans. The Speaker of the 11th Parliament, Anita Among, has on different occasions expressed that she, and by extension, the institution she heads, exists to adhere to the wills and wishes of Mr. Museveni. The executive is overreach over the legislature, where it commands the majority with 337 MPs and more than a dozen leaning independents, often leads to rubber stamping the latter's decisions, many times without considerable independent thought, sometimes not in line with the wishes of the electorate. The 1996 elections ushered in the 6th Parliament through the subsequent election cycles to the current 11th House, voted in 2021. While there are mixed reactions on the performance of the successive parliaments, there is a massive consensus that the current one could be the worst in post-independent Uganda.
No clearer of saying there won't be a parliament, because the role of parliament is to separate powers and checks and balances. But here I have one arm saying we shall never do anything to displease another arm. So effectively, we can now write off parliament.
What the executive wants, it gets. The Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, Norbert Mao, says a constitution is supposed to have checks and balances, but the executive is overbearing the legislature and the judiciary, and that is not a good thing. The constitution was supposed to ensure that nobody clings to power, and that is why we put term limits. The judiciary too has not been spared. The period from 2007 has been marred by endless attacks on the judiciary by the executive. Joram Paul Sonko, NTV News.